Welcome to Next Up. I'm Mark Halperin, editor-in-chief of Two-Way, host of this program, Next Up. And somber for all of us here. Just a couple days ago in the last episode, I was sitting in this chair talking to Charlie Kirk, and now he's gone. And we're going to spend this episode trying to grapple with that. We'll review some of my past conversations with him. We'll talk about the moment of political violence. And joining us in a moment, Megyn Kelly, host of the Megyn Kelly Show, a good friend of Charlie's, and no person I'd rather speak to about what all this means and what we do next. Then Megyn, and then Robert Pape of the University of Chicago will talk about threats, my reported monologue on what made Charlie special, and then again, highlights from some of the past conversations I had with him, which I'll tell you why they meant so much to me, and I hope to people who got to watch them and listen to them. But first, Megyn Kelly. Megyn and I spoke yesterday on her program during breaking news of the story, and as I said, there's no one who better understands what Charlie meant to the conservative movement and what kind of person he was than Megyn. And Megyn, thank you for making time.
Oh, of course, Mark. Thanks for doing our show yesterday while it was all unfolding.
Yeah. My big project now is to try to deal with what's coming, which is the anger that you and I know is felt by so many people we know who knew Charlie. They're sad, of course, but a lot of anger. And from talking to folks yesterday overnight, a lot of that comes from a feeling that the left doesn't get why Charlie was so important. They're acting like some Republican operative was killed as opposed to an assassination of a leader who meant so much. So could you just start explaining why was Charlie so important to so many people, not just people we know, but millions of people around the country?
He was probably our most effective messenger. I mean, more than anyone. He could take the ideas that we debate every day on our shows and in our politics, condense them into digestible bits and release them on people in a powerful and persuasive way. He was winning over critics. He was actually converting people from the left to the right, person by person. You know, just looking at his past week in covering him yesterday, it's like he was at Oxford not long ago. He was in Japan on Sunday. He was in Utah, as we know, yesterday. He was launching a tour at which we were debating with him whether we'd go to Utah or Indiana in the next couple of weeks. We wound up going to Virginia with him. And it's like there was no stopping him. He honed his communication skills to absolute perfection. And he did it by using them not just with people who agree with him, but more importantly, with people who don't, with an open heart and an open mind. They unfairly demonized him so many times, but one of the things we all loved about him was Charlie was a happy warrior. Charlie was kind, he was warm, he was giving. He did not look with disdain upon you if you showed up and you disagreed with him, or even if you insulted him. He actually might laugh a little, like if you insulted him or took a shot at him. And that was like the key to his magic. That was the key to getting these young people to actually listen to him. And one of the things I've noticed in the past 24 hours is that he not only had such an importance to those of us who are on the political right, but to our kids. You know, my son, my daughter too, he was in their algorithms. They were extremely jarred by this news. They're 14 and 15, Mark. I mean, he was speaking to a younger generation of kids who were apolitical and explaining to them these issues that they hear their parents debate or they hear kicked around in the news in a way that they could understand and access. And I know, for example, at my son's school today, they were going to plant the number of flags of those we lost on 9/11 around the college campus, around the high school campus, and they just added one more for Charlie. I mean, that's how much he meant, not just to us, but to the youth of America. And I'll also say young men in particular.
Yeah. President Trump announced he's going to be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously. You and I both have heard overnight from people who didn't know that their kids were so close to Charlie. I'm sure you have too. At least I have. And none of that surprises me because I've been hearing it for years from folks saying my kids aren't interested in politics. Gavin Newsom said it when he interviewed Charlie, that his kid was so excited. And as you said, probably more men than women, but Charlie was not blind to that. He and I talked on Tuesday about this new NBC poll that showed the disparity in support for President Trump and his policies between men and women. And of course, typical Charlie, he was saying, great on the men, on the males, but what can we do about the females? what are proper ways you've thought of or can think of to honor Charlie, to not to make concrete this notion that we cannot let his work die with him? What are things you think the country can do, or the president can do besides awarding him this high honor?
I mean, there's a big difference there between what the rest of us can do and what Trump can do. But for the rest of us, we have to follow his example. We have to say all the things that we know are true and right, no matter what the consequences in terms of name calling or bad grades or even professional consequences. We have to say what's true, what we know is true. He considered his mission on this earth to fight evil and speak truth. What better way is there to honor him than to do more of that? And especially now that the threat environment feels greater and more acute, that's the time it's even more important to speak the truth and fight evil. And that means we're going to need a revolution on college campuses that is driven by the acolytes of Charlie Kirk. We're going to need every conservative or conservative-leaning person on every college campus across this country to speak their minds, to not remain quiet in the moments where the liberals are dominating the conversation and telling us the things we know are untrue, like a man can become a woman, the race dividing that we've seen since 2020, at least. Of course, it was before as well. You must speak up. If you don't, they've won. Charlie's not here to lead it anymore. You're going to have to lead it yourselves. You're going to have to show up. You're going to have to form a Young Republicans Club or a Turning Point chapter, which will go on. And you're going to have to say all the things, including to the professors and to your colleagues. And that goes for those of us who are out of college as well. That's the only way I can think of to honor his legacy. With respect to Trump, we have to see. We need to know who the shooter was. And we need to know specifically the ideology that was behind it. Already there are reports out today that are compelling. I'm sure you saw the Steven Crowder report.
Yeah.
And Steven Crowder's got a very solid record. I cover him and follow him extensively. Steven's had very solid law enforcement leaks for years now. I trust him implicitly on this. And not only was his leak from the ATF and an alleged document on the shooter put out there by somebody who I trust, but it was confirmed. Let's say there are 10 details in there. 8 of them were just confirmed by the FBI at the presser.
Right.
The ones that were not mentioned were the allegations in the ATF report about what was allegedly written on the 3 unspent cartridges in the gun, which spoke to a specific ideology. No one asked about it because no one there would follow Steven Crowder. Now, would they? Their loss. So we'll find out shortly whether the ideology is as the bullets reportedly convey, and that'll give us some framework for what to do. But Trump, just one other point, Mark. Trump, there is something that Trump can do. Okay, so if it is a politically motivated, targeted assassination based on politics, then we actually are going to have to take a look at the people who are behind the ideology that pushed it, and what has everyone been saying on that front? What has been the messaging? Because it is fair game to look at it. And then those people must be held to account. And those people must reflect on how they've talked about Charlie Kirk and, frankly, others like him who have those similar messages. So we'll get there when we get there. But in the wake of this young girl's murder on this train in North Carolina, the shooting of young Christian children in Minneapolis, there actually is something else Trump can do. Trump needs to not only open the doors again to institutionalization, as he's doing with his cleanup of the homeless encampments in city after city. He needs to create the facilities that can house them. And I don't mean an apartment complex run by leftists. I mean a lockup facility that is humane, to which a loving mother would send her son. Like we saw in the case of the Charlotte, North Carolina shooter. She had no place to send him, and she knew he was dangerous. And I don't know what this person's ideology is going to be behind Charlie, but we've seen in the Minneapolis shooting as well, someone who was sick, and it was obvious to people around them. And the writings proved it, and the person's behavior had grown progressively bizarre. And what we see in 99% of these shootings is the people around them had no place to send them. They didn't know what to do. The law enforcement system can't handle them unless and until they've committed a crime. The psychiatric system won't handle them. They can't talk someone out of psychosis or sociopathy, and most won't even try. Now, yes, schizophrenia, sure, there's medication, but they give you a prescription. If you take it, it's up to you. We need to be more flexible and open-minded to involuntary institutionalization, just as most countries in the West already are. We are the extreme outliers on this in not allowing it because of our First Amendment, because of the Bill of Rights. Well, you know what? Our civil liberties matter too. The civil liberties of law-abiding people, and those need to be front and center.
Yeah, I mean, given how aggressive the president has been on anything that matters to him, and we know this matters to him, I think you'll see once at a place and time of his choosing, his advisors choosing, and the vice president, of course, will be heavily involved because of his relationship. I think you'll see more than just this rewarding of a medal. I think you'll see pretty substantial action. I want to ask you about Charlie. One of my disappointments, not a surprise, but disappointments, is that people in what I call the dominant media, they don't understand who he was or what he was about. And so the coverage is very superficial. They call him right-wing activist and things like that.
Or far right. Far right.
Yeah, far right-wing. He's such a talented guy. And I spent a lot of my time when I talked to him asking about that as a journalist, so interested in how someone without family connections at such a young age had achieved so much. So what are some traits of his that you think allowed him to achieve so very much in so many different realms at 31?
I think first and foremost, Mark, he really felt like he was God's messenger. I really think he felt he was driven by God, that he was mission driven, and that it was a divine mission. And that's what gave him all of his inspiration. He was so tireless in his pursuits. There was never a point at which he said, it's good enough. You know, it wasn't about money for him. All the money that Turning Point was making, he was putting back into the organization. Charlie didn't have some desire to live large and have this huge, expensive life. He wanted to change the country for the better. And that's why he knew, you know, one of the things I noticed yesterday, and going back over some of our own interviews and some of Charlie's clips, he knew he was under threat. In some of the interviews he gave, he talked about the death threats that he got. He talked about how well armed he was, what a good security team he had. But, you know, in a way, notwithstanding all that, Mark, he was too trusting. He was too trusting because he was exposed in a way he shouldn't have been at that event. You know, the rooftop shooter was obviously a foreseeable risk given what happened to Trump the summer before. And I think Charlie's security team just didn't envision it as being a realistic possibility for him. In any event, my point is simply he was courageous. He knew that there was a threat, and he continued out there anyway. And his wife, Erica, too, continued out there anyway. He said repeatedly he felt that he had a mission to fight evil and speak truth. And that's what he did. He didn't care who was across from him. And I spoke to him after many of these media-generated controversies on my show and on his. And he would thank me for defending him because the defenses were so few and far between. You know, even some on the right, Mark, to my great lamentation, would rip on Charlie and didn't like Charlie because they thought he was MAGA, you know, the more establishment right, you know, the right of yesteryear, not Trump's MAGA right. And they diminished him. They would jump on the controversies. They would see him as somebody with whom you wouldn't want to be associated, you know, not in polite company. He only got asked back onto Fox within the past 4 months. He was banned at Fox for most of his tenure building Turning Point. They didn't want anything to do with him. So I just, for those people, I have a level of anger today. I forgive them, but I'm coming off a level of anger because he wasn't what they said. They needed to get past the fact that they had this image of the guy and try to actually listen to him, because I also share in the belief that he was a messenger from God. He was speaking true sense and saying all the hardest things and saying them really bravely. And for me, that's what I hope his legacy will be.
Yeah, and you alluded to this several times as a happy warrior, the opposite of a hater. It confounds me even today in the wake of his death, people saying, you know, he spewed hatred. This guy had a pure heart. It was so kind, and you can't find anybody who dealt with him and knew his heart, who wasn't in awe of just what a kind person he was.
It's such a bastardization by the left. And in the past, whatever it's been, 18 hours, I've had zero appetite to look at what they're saying about him. Like I'm having a really difficult time caring. And that's unlike me. You know, usually on these stories, I definitely look at what the left is saying, and then I usually mock them on my show, and it's somewhat cathartic. but I'm just not there at all. I just feel like they can go fuck themselves. I couldn't give two shits about what they think of Charlie Kirk. They didn't know him. They don't understand any of us. And it's because of willful blindness. They choose to demonize rather than seek to understand. So fuck them. I just feel like we know who he was. We understand his legacy. We will live up to it. We will continue his mission. We will shove it down their throats with every show and column that we have, and we will do it relentlessly. If they think they've gotten less of Charlie Kirk, they're going to get more. I'm telling you, these are disciples of his on these college campuses who now are going to find the strength to rise up against the nonsense. And people like me, like you, like Ben Shapiro, all of us who have been in these trenches for quite some time only feel emboldened, not cowed, emboldened to say all of the things and say them even more forcefully and to work on being even more compelling and even more energetic so we can say them in more places to more faces and persuade more millions over to our side. They've done exactly what they didn't want to do. And the one thing they haven't done is to silence Charlie's message, though they've succeeded in silencing him.
Megyn, so grateful to you. I know how hard this is for you and how raw it is and how raw it's going to remain. But I couldn't be more grateful to you, not just for making time, but to offering the clarity to explain what he was about. Because as you suggested, there's so many voices out there, not either ignorant or malevolent, who don't want his true memory and his true essence to be clear to the public. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for making time, and grateful to you, and we'll talk again soon.
Anytime, Mark. See you soon.
Okay, next up, my reported monologue on what made Charlie Kirk so very special, what made him different, and highlights from some of our past conversations, including one just 2 days ago. That's next up. Attention, folks, 64 years or older, this is important. The Department of Justice recently sued 3 major Medicare brokers for claiming they were unbiased while allegedly pushing people into plans that got them the biggest kickbacks. It's true, most insurance agents cannot be trusted, and you can't rely on government resources either. That's why I want you to know about a place called Chapter. Chapter was started by people who went through this personally in their own families after their parents were pushed into the wrong Medicare plans by an agent who was more focused on commissions than on good care. Chapter's mission is very simple: to give every American the honest, straightforward Medicare advice that they need and that they deserve. And here's what makes them different. They're the only Medicare advisor that compares every plan nationwide, not just a few. That saves their clients an average of $1,100 every year. There's no reason not to call. It's quick, it's easy, and they can review your options in less than 20 minutes. If you're already in the good right plan for you, they'll tell you. But if there's a better one, they'll help you switch. This could be the most important call you make this year. Dial pound 250 and say Chapter Medicare to get the peace of mind you deserve. Again, that's pound 250 250 and say Chapter Medicare. Next up, what made Charlie Kirk so special? I did not know him nearly as well as many people I know, but I knew him well enough, I think, to understand what he was about. And I was always so interested whenever I talked to him or talked to other people about him, about how he was different as a person, as a political operative, as a builder. So here's my best sense from talking to a lot of people, including overnight, so many of the people who loved him and cared about him and understood him far better than I did. There are people who enter a room the way the morning light slips through the blinds. It's quiet, but then suddenly the outlines are clearer. Charlie Kirk, he lived in that light. He worked where policy meets persuasion. That was what he did. Where the day's work isn't noise, it's numbers. For him, voter registration tallies counted, how many donors he was able to call counted, where he got volunteers placed in a campaign, always refining his arguments until they basically moved on their own. Charlie was a man of math and science. He cared about zeros and ones and the data for sure, but also he was a creature of poetry, of the human spirit. He wore a lot of titles, had a lot of different jobs. He made each of them sound simple when I talked to him about it. He was a political strategist, a great public speaker, a very successful video podcaster, a hugely successful fundraiser for his organizations, a great organizer, a lobbyist of sorts, not officially, but knew when he wanted to make Congress bend to his will and how to act to do it. And he was a builder. I asked him in an interview, which we'll show to you in just a minute, what his profession was, what he would put on his tax returns. And he chose the simple word entrepreneur, as if he ran some sort of shop on Main Street that just happened to scale big across the whole country and in many cases around the world. That modesty, that simplicity, that was part of Charlie's charm. Big undertakings he'd talk about, explain them in a tone you'd use if you're ordering a cup of coffee. Big grand projects carried out with very hard work, but always with a lot of modesties. What mattered to him most was spirit. Despite what some people on the left or in the media would tell you, Charlie was not a hater. Really, he was quite the opposite of that. And in terms of talent, I have never in my career met anyone shrewder about politics. And I've met most of the great political operatives of the last 30 years or so. No one better and better liked in his movement that he helped shape, the MAGA movement, that he was one of the president's top lieutenants in. Oftentimes, you've all seen this in your lives, when people get great power, it makes them small. Charlie did not become smaller with the power he had. It didn't make him arrogant. Imagine what his life was like. He was 31 when he was killed. He was running a $100 million plus business, a private organization, a leader in his party, friends with both the president and the vice president, and known by a roster of top business and political leaders, others all across this country. It did not make him brittle or vain or cruel. Charlie wasn't like that. He carried his success the way a good waiter would carry a tray: steady, attentive, unself-conscious, consistently like that. If you think you don't know someone who's under 25 who wasn't a follower of Charlie's, you're wrong. I've been contacted since he was killed by so many parents saying to me, I didn't realize how my kids even knew who Charlie Kirk was or how connected they were to him. His current ran under dorm rooms, through the group chats, church basements, school auditoriums, through comment threads and long car rides home after rallies. Charlie had a big following. Very uncommon these days to be someone who can reach so many people who aren't that interested in politics or are very interested with the same message. Charlie's success was based on the oldest of disciplines: hard work, getting up early, didn't use drugs or alcohol, didn't get a lot of sleep. And sometimes I'd kid him that I could tell he was a bit tired. He would do the same back to me. Charlie believed in this age where populism has grown so big and in some cases done so much damage. He believed populism was an accelerator on big ideas, not a wildfire, a spark that could move the engine, but not a blaze that would consume a forest. Both President Trump and Vice President Vance loved Charlie to the max, at least in their own ways. Different temperatures, but the same flame. They loved him for a lot of reasons, including that this guy was a cool cat. He kept his cool when he did the work. And they knew how hard he worked on their behalf. Back in January, amidst all of official inaugural balls, Charlie threw a big party. His organization, Turning Point, had at a giant hotel in D.C. A lot like the annual gatherings he threw, where young people from around the country gathered. It was a spectacle, but a spectacle with a purpose. It was a giant party, room after room, with food stations and bars and so many people, incredible atmosphere, and staged with ambition. Not necessarily Charlie's kind of party. He'd rather be with his wife and kids, and certainly not at the open bar. But it was in proportion to the very person at the center of that event. What that night showed is what Charlie believed about public life. You got to make strong arguments, to be sure. Ideas matter, but it's also about the staging. It's about the hospitality. It's about welcoming people in. Ideas, Charlie knew, required rooms and lights and microphones. They needed a path and an entrance through a crowd. Charlie never forgot that. He was, like his friend Donald Trump, an extraordinary showman. And like Trump, in service of ideas. Charlie always stayed in service of both ideas and of Jesus. But he knew in the real world where he was operating, that required a lot of pageantry. Among Charlie's many talents, he's one of the best marketers of political ideas I have ever seen. Megyn and I talked about that. He'd come up with something, a phrase, he'd workshop it, he'd refine it, he'd reimagine it. He'd strip it back into its essence until he had the strongest case he thought he could make, unembarrassed, full-throated. He always measured success with clear metrics. He didn't like to have meetings where there were no goals or timelines, names next to each task. He was extremely serious about getting stuff done. And it wasn't just with cold efficiency, although he surely had that. It was care and insistence that you've got to take the time available to you to do what you can do. Nothing good, Charlie knew, becomes real by accident. Another thing about Charlie, pretty remarkable, rarer than it should be, he was teachable. He loved to learn. When we talked 2 days ago about coming up to New York City and going to see a campaign event with Mr. Mamdani, the socialist, Charlie was really interested, just as he's learned so much on all of his tours, including the one where he perished. He was eager to learn from anyone, especially, including and especially, his critics. If the other side framed an argument more clearly, he would say, why? Why are they winning that debate? If they built some sort of tool that worked really well, he wanted to know, how'd they build it? How does it work? Charlie lived one of the oldest lessons. Wisdom is found in many fields, and pride is a poor tutor. Charlie had no pride about learning from others. Then came the 2024 election. Charlie said he was going to register folks to vote, including and especially young people, and turn them out. The traditional Republican consultants, including many who had worked with Charlie and liked him, they scoffed. They would say to me, Charlie's going to pour all this time and money into voter registration and turnout. It will not work, they said. Those were chores that are for pros, not for amateurs. Charlie knew they were saying that. He kept his own counsel. He worked with his team, and he proved them wrong. The memos they wrote about how Charlie would fail, those aged poorly. When the totals came in on election night, it was clear the work had spoken. Charlie had done what people said he couldn't do, and I believe he made the difference in the Electoral College for President Trump through his voter registration efforts. It was a parable for the talents that are told in spreadsheets in politics. What you stored grows if you work hard and smart. Charlie liked to say that what Americans want, we talked about this the other day, they want simple things, durable things, a healthy, happy family, a welcoming community, solid opportunities, and like Charlie, all filled with a sense of optimism, a chance to feel pride in both themselves and in their country, a confidence in the American economic system. Charlie saw that list not as a wish, but as a set of assignments to go through carefully and achieve. One by one, he would always match his actions to the outcomes he thought the country needed, the outcomes that affected, as I say, the real lives of real people. The ledger for Charlie was about material things, but more so, it was moral. Moral before political. It always stayed that way till his last day here. At times, he felt almost scriptural in a very familiar sense. Nothing was obscure, only what we all know, that Charlie believed that small beginnings could move mountains. He trusted the mustard seed. He always remembered that the Good Samaritan did not outsource compassion. Charlie would stop, tend, he paid what prices needed to be paid. He always promised to return and fix things and make them better. He kept warning about building on sand, and he worked as if the evening would ask for an accounting, which unfortunately this week it did. Charlie's manner carried with it the steadiness of someone who knows the truth. People are forgetful often, but they're not faithless. It's going to take time, more than I think a lot of people around me know, for those of us who relied on Charlie to remember that, consistently remember, he's not going to be around a corner anymore. He's not going to be on the other end of a text or a group chat. That is what happens when a life ends that's been woven through other lives so tightly that the fabric, if you look closely, holds its shape. We're in a time of superpowers and superstores, trade wars, drone wars, partisan wars, screen time, all those serial Zooms we're on, and the disconcerting world of AI. All of that is troubling, sometimes scary. Charlie always focused on the human fix, the ties that bind us all, a handshake, an agenda with names on it, the ride to a polling place, the gentle insistent, the clarity always beats noise. Charlie made things feel close. That's part of the reason he inspired so many people. He kept the fire in the hearth and always had his door open to anybody. History's always going to argue about eras and about ideologies, always. But those who worked beside Charlie say they saw something simpler in him. He was shrewd, he was kind, he was relentless about results. He believed big change begins as something small, something you can do today and then build on tomorrow. In a world that too often rewards superficial performance, Charlie always was guided by purpose. We're in a time now that prizes for so many rewards from short-term hits. Charlie, though, thought about the long term. He chose order and sustained effort. When evening came for Charlie, the column of what got done was a lot longer than the column of what he said or what was left undone or unsaid. I've thought a lot about this. If there's a proper benediction for the life that he led, it's one that everybody knows. He was a well done, good, and faithful servant. Like so many people who knew Charlie in one way or the other, they're going to miss him. I already do miss him quite a bit. His memory is going to live on, and he'll be honored quite a bit, but he cannot be replaced. I'd like you to see now a little bit of my conversations with Charlie over the last year or so, both here on Next Up as well as on Two Way, where he was a great guest and great conversations. I always tried to ask him questions he wasn't expecting, questions that might bring out parts of Charlie that didn't come up in a 2 or 3 minute news hit on a cable channel. So here are a little bit of what I fondly remember as my conversations with Charlie Kirk. I'm fascinated by Charlie Kirk. He's an incredible story. And as much as he's covered, he's undercovered. And as much as he's highly rated, he's underrated.
Great to be here, Mark. Thank you. It's an honor. I am a fan.
You have built something really extraordinary. When people ask you what your occupation is, what do you say?
I would best describe myself as an entrepreneur, which I thank you for all the kind words, Mark. And some of that is earned and some of it is not. So thank you. It's just right place, right time, honestly. And I would agree with one of your things. I have probably been underestimated by a lot of people on the left and even on the right at times. But I definitely wear several hats. I do a 2-hour program every single day that you're nice enough to join quite frequently. Our audience loves you, by the way, Mark. It's phenomenal, which gets turned into a podcast. It's on hundreds of radio stations across the country. It's simulcast on multiple television stations as well.
And just to be clear, for some people, that would be a full-time job, 2-hour daily show with that level of distribution. So that's one thing you do. Incredible. Keep going.
Yeah, and then on my day job, as I joke around, is CEO of Turning Point USA and Turning Point Action and Turning Point PAC, but that one only really gets deployed in short-term election cycles. But really, Turning Point USA and Turning Point Action, which I started will be 13 years ago in June, and well over 1,000 full-time people on staff now, all across the country, working in several different departments, from our high school department, our college department, our faith department. We have Blexit, and we have Turning Point Academy. We have our entire Turning Point Action side that is divided from our grassroots team, our ballot chasing team. We have a whole student government project. We have I would say, a pretty sophisticated digital operation on top of all of that.
And that's over 1,000 people, right?
Correct. That's
and how much money annually was coursing through those various things?
Over 100 million. So about 100 to 120 million a year.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Also, probably as much as you delegate, also a full-time job.
That is a full-time job to raise that, without a doubt. And look, we're super blessed and very fortunate with over 400,000 donors that now give to us, which is a real number. On top of that, I also create a lot of content, and I speak. Yesterday I did 5.5 hours of speaking on campus at Texas A&M University, on top of doing the show and on top of raising money. And so we post those videos online, and the last couple of years they've really gone super viral and making a big difference with young folk.
Have you and I ever talked about Rush as a broadcaster? I can't remember.
No, we haven't. No, and okay. I would love that.
I used to listen when I would take vacations and I would drive like out west. I would arrange the ride for 3 hours to listen. Rush would only talk about things he was interested in.
That's
the audience right. And the audience knows. The audience knows if you're hosting a show and you're talking about something that's not interesting.
And what I loved, first of all, you're exactly right. One of my favorite shows ever. Hilariously, it's so funny you say that. I remember I once had to drive from Denver to Steamboat, and I found the signal of Rush on the entire drive. There's something about driving in the West and listening to Rush Limbaugh that just kind of fits, right? Like the Americana landscape and listening to Rush. And he was just going on and on and on about his iPhone. It was like 30 minutes. He was talking about how he got a new iPhone. And he made it so interesting.
Yep.
Right? I mean, like, how could he was talking about all the new features and how he's in touch with Apple. And actually, Rush gave me an iPhone. He would give it to some of his friends, and he gave me many models ago an iPhone.
Yeah.
Look, I actually grew up as not a Rush baby, but I was told Rush was too much of an extremist growing up, by people around me, not by my parents. It was just kind of the vibe that he had.
I've told people for years, whether you're Democrat, Republican, or journalist, whatever, if you want to be a broadcaster on audio, video, or both, go listen to Rush, hours and hours if you haven't listened, because it's just so much to learn from. And I'd say the same thing about you now, as both a broadcaster and as an political entrepreneur. Like, if you're a Democrat and you're not studying Charlie Kirk, you're making a huge mistake, because you're doing stuff that is just like Rush. People have done stuff like it, but not exactly what you're doing. Your work organizing and energizing young people on behalf of the conservative movement and President Trump is also, I would say, of all the things you've done, one of your most historic achievements. It really is historic. And there was a lot of skepticism. You know this, even from people who you're friends with, even people who like you, who said, Turning Point's not going to turn any young people out. They don't know what they're doing. They've never done it before. Get out the vote is not for amateurs. Like Donald Trump, you're riding the crest of a movement.
I talk a lot with the folks in the administration. I also, and I'm sure this will come up in Q&A, I think they're doing a much better job than the media would always give them credit for. There's a mass amount of incoming, and they have picked the biggest fights because the voters voted for those fights. I'm just here as a friend of the president, and again, right place, right time. Look, as far as like where I find myself in the role, the best way I think I actually help the administration is not like being in the White House or being in the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Oh, that's nice, right? That's amazing. It's an incredible enormity to even walk those halls. It's actually being in the grassroots. And then also being an explainer of what the administration is doing or trying to do to people that don't have time to consume, 6 hours of this information and get down into the weeds.
There are people who have the job I do who would look at your contact with the administration and the money you raise, and they'd say this is evil and insidious, and there's something wrong with it. And if you were on the left, if you were doing this with Barack Obama, and you were organizing young people and helping pressure members of Congress who weren't supporting the president's agenda, you'd be Time Person of the Year. You'd be considered a hero by the media. But because you're doing it on behalf of,
definitely not going to get that, Mark.
Yeah, because you're doing it on behalf of a Republican, it's treated differently. The reason I find you so interesting is because you've created a new paradigm for how to do this. Do you think you'd be good at being a CEO of a private sector company?
Well, I will say our show, which is private, is profitable.
Yeah.
So
if I gave you $100 million investment and said go start a manufacturing business in the United States, what industry would interest you? What would you like to make?
Well, I think that drones are the future, and so I'm fascinated by drones, and I think that that he who is able to control and produce their own drones is going to be able to determine and chart their own destiny.
All right. Going to bring folks in for Mr. Kirk. As always, unmute. Tell him, us, where you are, for those who don't know, and tell us what's on your mind. And we start with Nilda. Go ahead, please.
Hi. Oh, my God. I'm so excited. I've been following Charlie for a long time. And now after Hilton trying to come out for governor here in California, what can we do here for our beautiful state? Charlie, you know how to.
Well, thank you. God bless you.
Great question. And just to frame it a little bit, California used to elect Republican governors, and except for Schwarzenegger, who was a bit of an anomaly, it's been a while. So do you think much about how to build a Republican Party in California, and what are the elements of that?
I think that it can be done in the next 10 years. And I know people might laugh, but listen, first of all, that's why I endorse Steve Hilton. I think that the chance of him winning this cycle might not be the best odds, but getting closer and closer to that is incredibly important. But if Hispanics, and especially Hispanic men, keep on moving in the direction that they have been moving nationally, California can be in play. I know over a long period of time, it requires voter registration, it requires no more demoralization. And finally, if young people continue to move in the broad way that we've seen, and California even minorly follows that trend, we could probably see some more competitive landscape in California. So I endorse Steve Hilton, and I wish him the best of luck and success.
All right. Nija, thank you. Nilda, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate it. How did Barack Obama govern as president that you found admirable?
Found admirable, boy. I could tell you first. I mean, the obvious. Let me just tell you background, and then I will try the best to answer that question. Actually, I do have an answer to that. But first, I grew up in Chicago during the Obama craze, 08, 09. So I understood the celebrity and the aura of Obama.
Yeah.
The big hope that everybody would repeat time and time again, that was his greatest failing, is they thought it would be a de-emphasis of racial politics, not an emphasis of racial politics. We were talking more about race at the end of the Obama presidency than at the beginning. I think that was one of his great failings. What I actually think he did well was that he could have been way more radical his last 4 years. He kind of took it easy. I'd say this as a conservative. He did not issue flurries of radical executive orders. He was, in some ways, so careful to not come across as like overly revolutionary as a president.
Uh-huh.
And there's a lot of historians that wrote this. And again, this is going to sound like improper, but you understand what I'm saying. There were some historians that have said about Obama that he knew he was the first black president, and he took that with a lot of weight. So he didn't want to be like overly radical and overly throwing away of White House custom.
Yeah.
And for that, I actually admired. And again, I don't mean to racialize it. That was his own telling to his own inner circle, right?
Understood.
And so, yeah, I think that in that way, it was good. And then the other thing I admire that, and Republicans in Congress need to realize this, he went big. He won a mandate, and he went very big that first year. He went for health care. He went for stimulus. It cost him, but he went really big. Yeah. And for that, I admire.
Charlie, what Supreme Court cases do you have your eye on now?
I don't know if it's being heard yet or if it's incorporated in a broader one, but the question on impoundment is the most important existential, I think, spending question in front. I'm sure, Mark, your reporting bears this out as well, of whether or not does the executive branch have to spend all the money that Congress appropriates.
Do you worry about Amy Coney Barrett and about the Chief Justice? Do you think it's an appropriate thing for you and your organization to do, to kind of put the same pressure on them in advance of rulings? No.
Absolutely not.
So you'll never.
In fact, no, I think it actually could have a self-defeating principle. I think that it sometimes could. Again, these are human beings that are judged. I mean, there's nothing you can do to what pressure. I mean, they're there for life.
Would you mobilize against them if they ruled adversely to the president's agenda?
I mean,
no.
No, I mean,
you wouldn't criticize them at a rally.
Criticize, yes, but instead, I think the way to win the Supreme Court is, remember, the old adage is they read newspapers too.
Yeah.
They listen to podcasts too.
Yeah.
Persuade them. They're people of high scholarly intent. They're very sophisticated. Instead of screaming into a rally like Chuck Schumer, you're going to feel the whirlwind or whatever, right? Maybe we need, in that particular instance, create an argument as to why you think their decision was right or wrong, or why you hope they'll rule a certain way.
All right. How many words in a thought bubble would you say, approximately?
How many words are in a thought bubble?
Yeah, about.
I've never. Six or seven. Yeah.
6 or 7. All right. I want the Charlie Kirk thought bubbles on the following. This is the rapid round here. So just like
here we go.
What's the thought bubble? Here we
go.
You
asked the best questions. I told my team. I said I gotta be on my game. Mark asked the best questions.
This would be good. This would be good. Charlie Kirk thought bubble. Marco Rubio wants to be president.
I prefer JD Vance, but Marco's great.
Okay.
I'm trying to count my words as I say it.
I understand. Hey, we'll go with approx. Jeanine Pirro, U.S. Attorney.
Phenomenal friend and far more qualified than the media realizes or is covering.
Is there any ally of the president who's not your friend?
Yes, but I'm not going to tell you who.
Really? Wow. Are you thinking of just like one particular person?
One or two.
One or two. Are they serving in the administration?
One of them is, yeah.
Okay, interesting. We'll have to come back to that next episode. All right, back to the thought bubble. 6 words. The president's team calls and said they want you to spend this weekend at Mar-a-Lago.
Thank you for the call. I have to see if I have a family conflict, but I'll do my best.
All right. And would you look for
which has actually happened before? Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. If you didn't have a family conflict, would you look forward to it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, he's the best to be around. You've spent time around him. He's a force of nature. He's got, I think, at times supernatural energy. And yeah, I mean, if I could be helpful, I will always be helpful to the president or his team.
Okay. somebody screens your calls, let's say, I know probably mostly you just pick up your cell phone, but somebody screening your calls and they say,
It's true. I have my own phone.
yeah, but somebody's, you hand your phone to somebody because you're doing something and they're screening it and they pick up and they say, I want the thought bubble. Hey, Charlie, it's Roger Stone.
Say, hi, Roger. How can I help you today?
All right. So would you be happy to hear from Roger?
I like Roger. I advocated for his pardon, and he's a uniquely American political figure. They do not have like Roger Stones in the Netherlands. Like there's something about him
that's true.
That I find to be dramatic and fun and unpredictable.
Yeah. Okay. You look down at your phone and there's a text from Pete Hegseth. Says, Charlie, I just can't take it anymore. I think I got to quit.
No. We work too hard. You're too good of a man. Grin and bear it. Turn off your phone for a day and keep going.
Okay.
That would be my advice.
Okay. JD Vance says, hey, Marco and I are going to the Pope's first Mass this weekend. Want to come? Thought bubble.
I will say, actually, I have to be in London to debate at Oxford. But I would actually honestly say, thank you for the invite. Hope you guys have a great time. I'm not Catholic, but please invite someone who would value it more. And I would value it a lot, but I would feel as if I'd be like stealing a seat from someone where that would be like the coolest thing in their life as kind of a cradle Catholic. I mean that like non-sarcastically. I think that a cradle Catholic would have much more reverence for that, even though I would be floored and honored and I love Catholics, but I think that would be
understood. Okay,
really
you look down at your phone. It's a text. Ready? It says this. Hey, Charlie, it's Kamala Harris. I got your number. I'm going to be in Phoenix and I would love to get together.
I would say, first I'd have to verify that it's actually her number.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'd say only on camera.
That would be your thought bubble? I'd only do it on camera?
Correct. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
What if she texts back and say, I've heard a lot of great things about you. I want to compare notes and at a private dinner.
No way. I would consider her to be disingenuous. Unless there would be an intermediary that would advocate for.
Okay, let's say
her,
then I would. Then I would
mutual
do it.
Yes.
You would do it. And
no,
how would
yes.
Would you look forward to it?
Of course I would. I love learning. I learned this from Tucker. Sit down with people, even if you disagree. Ask great questions. Be curious.
Okay, couple more. You get a call and you pick up the phone rings. You don't recognize the number. It's a blocked number. You pick it up, and the person says, "This is Barack Obama, and I would like you to come to Chicago and speak to a group of young student leaders."
Yes, happy to. Absolutely.
Happy to. You would do that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'll speak. I mean, honestly, I'd love to meet Obama. I'm not like a fan of his, but I actually
never met him?
I have a whole. No, I haven't. No, I've seen him. I saw him at the inauguration, which was actually the first time I ever saw him in person. And I would love to privately figure out. I have a theory he's not actually as radical as the current left wing of his party is.
That's accurate.
And I want to confirm that. I want to kind of feel out what drives him. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd meet him. And I think that if he wants me to speak to a bunch of students, I'll speak to, any students. We could maybe speak at the Obama Library if it ever gets finished.
South Park. Were you a fan of South Park as a boy?
Yes and no. I'll tell you that when I was, it was a big deal when I was in like 8th, 9th grade. So I watched a couple episodes. Thinking I'd ever be on South Park was like beyond anything I had on my, back this summer, I couldn't have imagined it. So.
Yeah. So they included you in the new episode. Do you care?
Like, is that I thought it was hilarious.
Thrill?
I thought it was awesome. I thought it was hilarious. I mean, people say, it was so funny. A lot of people on the left were mad that I wasn't mad. I thought it was really funny. And, a lot of people are, we have the master debater shirt. We have, it's just kind of, you have to be able to laugh at yourself and don't take yourself so seriously. And honestly, like they captured the essence of like what we kind of do in a very South Parkian way. And, that's a symbol of success. And I think we on the right have to be able to laugh at ourselves better.
I've never been so proud of you for all your accomplishments. This to me was like the pinnacle. Okay, next up, my conversation with one of the country's leading experts on political violence, the University of Chicago's Robert Pape. That's next up. Okay, now I want to tell you a story about a guy named Leo Grillo. He was on a road trip and Leo came across a Doberman. The dog was severely underweight, clearly in a lot of trouble. So Leo rescued the Doberman and he gave him a name. He called him Delta. Sadly, though, Delta is just one of many animals that needed help which inspired Leo to start a new group called Delta Rescue. It's the largest no-kill, care-for-life animal sanctuary on the planet. They've rescued thousands of dogs and cats and horses from the wilderness, and they always provide them what they need. They give their animals shelter, love, safety, and a home. This dedication, everlasting love to animals, that's Leo's mission, and it's his legacy. Delta Rescue relies solely on contributions from people like all of us to do this good work. If you want caring for these animals to be part of your legacy, speak now with your estate planner, because there are tax savings and estate planning benefits too. You can grow your estate while letting your love for animals live well into the future. Check out now the estate planning tab on their website to learn more and to speak to an advisor. We call a dog man's best friend for a good reason. You can help those who need it most. So please, right now, visit deltarescue.org to learn more. Again, that's deltarescue.org. Okay, joining me now, next up, Robert Pape, political science professor and director of the University of Chicago Project on Security and Threats. Really one of the most thoughtful people I've ever talked to about this question of political violence. And at this moment, we need all the expertise we can get. Professor Pape, welcome. Thank you for being part of this.
Thanks for having me on, Mark. I'm sorry it's under these tragic circumstances.
Yeah. So you study these things. You've helped people in government navigate the dangers here. And you and I in communication, you've been warning about something like this for quite some time. What are the circumstances that you think have led us to this moment? Are they economic? Are they cultural, psychological? Why have we gotten to this point as a country?
So I'm glad to explain the circumstances, Mark, there are social changes happening in the country that are radicalizing our politics. And then this is leading to support for political violence. The first point I'd like to make, though, is that I'm sorry to say that as tragic as yesterday was, something like yesterday was predictable. This may not be true for journalists. It may not be true even for leaders in the White House. But the fact of the matter is, we are falling down a course where we are seeing in our national surveys that we do at our center at the University of Chicago, evidence after evidence that our publics in the United States, both on the right and the left, support political violence at higher levels than at any time since we started doing these quarterly surveys in the summer of 2021. So that's the reason why those New York Times op-eds in the last 9 months have been basically sending up the SOSs. That's the reason why I've been saying we're on the brink of major political violence. And I'm sorry to say that we are now at a watershed moment where we have crossed a major threshold. And as bad as yesterday was, I'm very concerned that if left to its own devices, this is going to get worse. And so that's why this conversation is so important. You're one of the most important audiences in the whole country because you speak to multiple parts of the country, which is so unusual. And this is a problem for multiple parts of the country. So if you like, Mark, I could give an answer then to what's going on in terms of the details.
Well, so you're saying people will say to pollsters, to people taking surveys across the political spectrum, that political violence is a good idea or a necessary evil, or that the other side's going to do it? What are they actually saying in these surveys?
What our questions, we ask very specific questions. So we don't ask the general question, do you generally support political violence? We do ask those. But we know from survey research, you want to ask more pointed questions. So for example, in the May survey that we conducted, this is a nationally representative survey done with NORC, one of the most reputable polling agencies on the planet, the gold standard. 39% of Democrats said they agreed that the use of force was justified to remove Donald Trump from the presidency. The use of force is justified to remove.
4 in 10 Democrats say force would be justified to remove the incumbent president.
Yep. Now you will then ask, well, wait a minute, what do they mean by the use of force? Yeah. What do each of those words mean? So, Mark, over the last 4 years, we have done secondary research. We have done focus groups. We have gone into probe in more detail, specific expert surveys on what do people think they understand that question to mean.
Right.
And 55% of people, we use a term, the use of force, Notice that that's not the word violence, because violence
Right.
can mean many things, yelling. And what we have learned in our survey research over the last 4 years is 55% of the people who who are responding the use of force, 55% mean assassination, murder, killing, shooting, violent mob to overthrow somebody.
Right.
So it's not always the same type of physical violence, but they are not just, there are about 40% that mean, like, even with use of force, yelling. But when you
Right.
use the phrase violence, that's more 1 in 10 means something physical, like a
Right.
shooting, where
So
it's 90% are on the softer side.
if you think about our history, and obviously the data is not going to be perfect over time because you've not been at it for decades, but you think about the 1960s when there was, of course, a lot of political violence. You think about the Civil War, obviously, going back longer. Are we in an unprecedented moment, or does this have an historical analog in this country?
It has a historic analog. Mark, I term our era the era of violent populism. So I coined a new phrase because all these movies about Civil War and all these people,
Right.
oh, there's nothing going on. No, there's a middle ground going on. So we needed to give it a name. So I gave it the name violent populism. And you see in the op-eds, the pieces in Foreign Affairs, this phrase is being used by me. And what I mean by that is something akin to the 1960s, where we are experiencing major social change, which is causing radical politics here because the social change is making the political outcomes much more fragile and much more consequential, which is leading to support for political violence in the body politic itself. I don't just mean by a few people under a rock in the fringe. I mean in what we normally call the mainstream. And
Right.
that is what our opinion surveys show. And yes, the historical analog here to the 1960s is apt. The reasons are not the same, of course, but I just want to point out that the idea that social change would lead to significant political violence in a country is really common in the study of political violence all around the world, which I've done for 30 years.
Right.
It's just the last 5 years I've had to focus on the United States because that's
Right.
been the critical case.
So when you talk about social upheaval, does that mostly have to do with the economy? Is it mostly about things like trans issues or gay marriage? What's the upheaval that people on the left and the right are reacting to?
Yeah, there's one big social change, and then there are some additional ones that are also significant. But let's talk about the big social change that is at issue. We are now transitioning for the first time in our 250-year history from a white majority democracy to a white minority democracy. For our entire 250-year history, although we've had different versions of whites in the population, we have been an overwhelmingly white majority country. Well, in 1990, just to give a number, we were 76% non-Hispanic white. Today, we are 57% non-Hispanic white. In the next 10 years, by 2035, maybe 2040, depending on deportations, we will then be 49% non-Hispanic white.
Let me stop you there because we both know that race, unfortunately, is a long-running factor in societies. Has any previous country gone from a majority white country to a minority white country?
Not quite in those terms, but countries like Lebanon, for example, countries like Yugoslavia. So we will find analogs to this social change that not in the identical way that our race structure and our ethnic structure looks, but we will find analogs to this. And for your readers, for your listeners, they may say, well, what is Professor Pape talking about? They should read some of the work by Donald Horowitz here. This is somebody writing about this as far back as the 1980s, not in the United States context, but this is a common understanding among experts.
And so in the recent past, when there's been periods of extreme violence and social unrest in Lebanon and Yugoslavia, you're saying that correlated with these kinds of ethnic or racial changes in the population.
Over decades, where over the decades, you get a disjuncture between the demographic change that occurs and also who governs the country.
Right.
And
So
if you notice,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about solutions, because this is a grim picture you're painting with the data. You advise policymakers what's required for this country to go back to a societal sense that political violence is unacceptable, that we can make change at the ballot box, we can make change through Congress and lobbying, more peaceful things. What's required to reset people away from an openness to political violence to achieve goals?
Well, there are short-term things we need to do, and then we could consider longer-term things. But right now, Mark, because of the watershed moment of yesterday, and because of the possibility that millions of people who feel wounded and sorrow over what happened, because Charlie Kirk was so beloved, millions will then, over the course of weeks, that will evolve into anger. And that could evolve into then worse things. We need to focus on the short term. And in the very short term, what's most important is our political leaders to condemn violence from their constituents, their side. And you're seeing this with the Democrats here, and we're getting more evidence about the shooter's motives as we speak. And then also restraint on the part of the constituents of the targeted side. So this is tough. And I've been calling for this, Mark, for several years in my op-eds, Boston Globe, New York Times. And you are now seeing that leaders on both sides are doing it, but they're doing it in their silos.
Right.
That is, the key next step is joint statements.
Right. So for instance, we've seen individual statements from the living former Democratic presidents denouncing what happened.
Yep.
My big idea that I've talked about, and I'll continue to talk about, is all the former presidents should go to President Charlie's funeral and have a big show of unity and put out some sort of joint statement, maybe even do a joint interview with me or someone else to say, all of us, regardless of party, condemn political violence. That's not the way things should be solved. Would that kind of symbolic move be significant?
Yes, and just to add on to your very good idea, Mark, then after the funeral, come to the University of Chicago on October 6th, where we've already reserved a giant forum where you can help me moderate a discussion among the presidents here that can then be televised around the country on this issue. So this is that level of importance, because the watershed, we have been seeing this rising surge of political violence. We haven't seen this since the 1960s. We now have a much better understanding of the causes. We know that the internet plays a role, but notice deplatforming hasn't stopped this, and that's because the internet's only a secondary factor. So as we are navigating this historic change in our country, it's really important that we have historic responses by our political leaders, and these are the things we are calling for right now.
So was President Trump's statement on Wednesday night helpful when he said, we're going to figure out who did this and they're going to be pursued and punished? Does that tamp down political violence, or does that encourage it?
I will say two things about that statement. Number one, for Donald Trump, that was a restrained statement.
Yeah. No, we're not great. We're not grading on a curve though here.
Well, number two.
Yeah.
What he did in that statement, more than anything else, is reflect the MAGA mood. And his opening 10 seconds captured that mood exactly as I would have expected. Sorrow and anger. Those were his two words. And what I'm saying is that sorrow is going to grow over the next several weeks. Those 2 million people who valued Charlie Kirk so much could well grow into 40 million people in the next month. And that sorrow can evolve, because that wounded population can evolve into anger.
Right.
And that is the trajectory that I'm sorry that we are on. Yeah. We saw this, Mark, after 9/11. After 9/11, we were wounded as a country. I was on television on 9/11 with some of our most senior leaders who swore all up and down we would never be angry. 18 months later, we invaded Iraq with 70% support of the public, and we had no evidence of any. We just did it because we were angry.
We talked about presidents, former presidents, being visible spokespeople, leaders with the capacity to tamp this down. Does it matter if governors do it, members of the clergy, business leaders? Like, where do people get their signals about how to think about political violence besides from presidents and ex-presidents?
At all levels. So what I have been saying, and I'm glad to say it on your program as well, is that all Democrats, governors, members of Congress, all former presidents, all levels need to be involved in the statements, just as all Republican leaders need to be involved in the statement. So yes, we have our standard bearers. These will be the presidents by definition. You know, they are the standard bearers. But then we also know from polling, and this is not unique to our polling, this would be true in most political polling, that people take their signals also from more local leaders as well. And that's one of the reasons, Mark, for years, I have worked with the sheriff's associations. So if you will, people scroll around, they'll see, oh, what is Professor Pape doing working with the Illinois sheriffs or the national, all these sheriff's associations. Well, these are some of the most important and trusted elements in our in our country, and they actually carry significant weight. It's a little bit like watching, your audience might watch the show Longmire, and people look up to Longmire and so forth. Well, that's true in many local communities. So it really is, you're right, it's not just one, but nonetheless, I think that the idea of the former presidents, your idea is exactly spot on about the event, the funeral here. But I would actually go further, because we need to not think if this is a one and done. We are on a rising bad trajectory for the country.
Right.
We need to do much more. And what I would say is the politicians need to put as much energy into tamping down the violence among their own constituents as they do running for office in the first place.
Yeah.
And
what about this? Just the mechanics of it. In other words, is one good way to deter political violence more security, more shows of force at events where someone could be the subject? I mean, there was no mystery that Charlie Kirk was out in the open and that people didn't like him. So is that a way to deter political violence? Simply shows of force, more security to make people who might be inclined to commit such acts be deterred because it seems harder to do?
In the short term, a week or two, this is certainly going to happen, whether it helps or not. And because it was Charlie Kirk, who was not actually an elected official, everybody would be well advised to have big podcasts here, to have more security and so forth and so on, as you're describing. However, it's important to realize that Charlie Kirk was extremely prominent in the Republican Party, extremely visible, but so too were many others. I wouldn't say hundreds, but I would say this is a larger set here and I don't really want to name names because I'm not trying to put anybody under a spot.
Yeah, definitely don't name names.
But what you've got is a wider pool, and over time, it really is going to be impossible to have perfect security around these wider pools. And people can find our homes online, things like that, as you know.
Isn't there a big difference? Maybe I shouldn't ask in such a loaded way. I was talking to a former FBI agent about this. To my layperson's mind, there's someone who's crazy, who's not part of any group, who doesn't really have a rational or linear political agenda. I'm going to kill the governor of Mississippi because I don't want him to sign the bill that's on his desk that I don't like. It's more just they're nuts. And they see, like a lot of mass murderers do, they see in the act of violence some sort of tending to their own insanity versus, we're going to take this person out because it achieves some very concrete, specific political result. I mostly see, and we're waiting to see as we speak here, who's being will be charged with killing Charlie. But isn't most of this just crazy people?
These are not alternative explanations, Mark, the way they're typically presented in the media. The media is often looking at mental illness as an alternative to the political motive
Right.
and not seeing that the real pipeline here is the more support there is in the public for political violence, the more volatile actors, I call them, people who are on the edge for one reason or another, will be nudged over the edge.
Right.
And that is the actual pipeline. Now, for something for your viewers to go find, so it's not just Professor Pape spouting this off and hand wavy, the Secret Service has done the best analysis to date of shooters and assassins in the United States. Your viewers can go find this. It's a report done by the Secret Service in the late 90s. They cover nearly 100 political attackers. This is our Secret Service.
And what did they find about them?
What they find is, number one, half of them have college education or graduate education. That is, the idea that they all fit a specific socioeconomic profile is not true. Right. Number two, they find that about 40% of them have some degree of mental illness, but only a tiny fraction go so far to have like hallucinations and so forth. So there's...
Let me ask you a question. And again, I don't know if the data will bear this out or you've got some subjective sense. People say in response to Charlie being assassinated, let's come together. Let's use this as an opportunity to lower the temperature, to speak out against political violence. Does history suggest that that's more likely, or that there are copycats or eye for an eye escalations that lead to more political violence? In other words, does a political act of political violence beget more, or could it be the game-changing time in which people turn to their better angels?
There are multiple pathways for political violence that we have to worry about, and they're not independent. So the first pathway I talked about is when you have larger and growing support for political violence in the body politic. And our surveys show that, again, about 39% of Democrats would fit this bill and about 24% of Republicans would fit this bill. So this is happening on both sides of the political spectrum. And then you've heard that pathway, but then there's another pathway, as you're saying, which is the copycat or the retaliation. So this is the problem, that now a prominent figure in the Republican Party has been attacked, and this can spur somebody to attack a prominent person who's in the media on the Democratic side, say CNN.
But does history suggest that's a hypothetical, or that happens?
It happens. History suggests that it's difficult to disentangle because they tend to be separated by months and sometimes even years in the say the Secret Service study. So it's you often see that in this is in the Secret Service study, and you see this in the anecdotal discussions on television and the media in the last day, that the political assassins themselves, the would-be assassins, really go and study the previous political assassins. This is another thing that they find in the report, which is they are rational enough that they will go and start to think instrumentally, and that includes studying mistakes and what's happened by others,
right?
So that they can improve their outcome, their tactical outcome, and that is again going side by side. So these are folks who are not so mentally ill that they can't actually have attack plans or escape plans,
right?
And so that's why it's important not to sort of think that this is all happening in a spontaneous way. The danger that we're facing is these attackers often will prepare for weeks. They will learn from each other. They will be inspired by each other. And unfortunately, what we saw yesterday was somebody who probably learned from Crooks's mistakes.
Right. All right. Last one. What gives you optimism? If people want to say, well, you know, the numbers don't look great. We've had some high profile occasions. Everybody's now read the list of recent occasions of this, and obviously the murder of Charlie. What would give you optimism that the country can move out of this?
The big source of optimism is that in our surveys, 70% of the public, that's 70% on different sides, very much support joint calls to tamp this down. That
Right.
is about 70% of the public. It's actually, unfortunately, shrinking a little bit. About 70% of the public abhors political violence. And the reason is because they can see the consequences of this getting worse and
Right.
getting worse.
Yeah.
Now, it's also the case that I believe political leaders can see that they have something directly at stake for themselves and their families. And
Yeah.
that's the reason why you can bring the leaders to have their incentives aligned with the center of the public.
Yeah, having the glass 70% full does sound good, but that still leaves 30% problematic. So,
And we need the leaders to bring that into action.
Right. Okay, Robert Pape, again, one of the country's foremost experts in understanding political violence. He's at the University of Chicago, and very grateful to you for sharing your expertise.
Thank you, Mark, for all you do.
Thank you, Professor. All right, that's it for today's program. We'll continue to think about Charlie and talk about Charlie. I am grateful to have known him. I'm grateful to have him on this show. And I went on his show on a regular basis and was honored to be there. His audience, his followers, his friends, his professional colleagues, all will miss him. And all of us will look to figure out ways to not just let his spirit live on and the ideas lived on, but to renew our fidelity to the importance of free speech, the free exchange of ideas, and the joy that Charlie, a tough combatant in the trenches, the joy he brought to everything he did, his beautiful family, his young children, and the tough work of trying to make this a more perfect union. Grateful to you for joining us. We'll be back next week with a couple more episodes. Appreciate your watching. Always be with us so you can know what's coming next up.